lot of people ask me, what does my dog see? We could guess what a dog sees, but we can't really tell you what its brain is processing. Their sensory worlds are not like our sensory world. They're living in a world that we would probably love to occupy for a little while, but it's not like ours. Vision doesn't play the role in their lives that it plays in ours. They don't have the kind of sharp detail vision that we have, so they don't see the fine structure of things that we're able to see, and their color vision is somewhat simplified compared to ours. So they don't see anything in the reds. So their vision is concentrated in blue and green. And frankly, they don't care much about color. It's just not important to them. They care about brightness and motion and shape. They have better vision at night than we have, probably. If you take a photograph, range of vision where we're not seeing anything and they're seeing things reasonably well. You'll see often these sort of night camera views of a cat looking for prey, and I think it's not completely unreasonable as to what they might at least be able to pick out that we would miss entirely. Even looking at exactly the same thing with the same lighting, it's not going to be the same to a cat as us. In general, predators have anteriorly placed eyes. So if you look at any of the cats, any of the dogs, you're going to see eyes in the front of their faces. They're predators, they're looking forward, they're looking for prey. Prey animals have laterally placed eyes. And the benefit of a laterally placed eye is it gives the animal full 360-degree coverage of the horizon at all times. If a predator occurs anywhere, they don't want to miss it. So the best way to do that is to have good vision in the regions where you expect a predator to be. If you're a prey animal, you're normally in an environment where the horizon's fairly flat. You're in some kind of open country, and you're looking at the horizon. Predators are going to appear somewhere on the horizon. They'll be near to you if you're unlucky, maybe far away. But wherever they're going to be at your level. So how do you solve the problem of looking in all directions? Well, most animals that have eyes built like ours have a part of the retina that's adapted for the highest quality of vision. We have a thing called a fovea at the back of the eye. Fovea means a hole or a dimple. That's our fovea. And in there are the cone cells that are adapted for best vision. Prey animals have what's called a strip fovea. The fovea actually extends along the back of the retina in a line reaching almost from one side to the other. And so as it looks at the horizon, it's seeing good detail at all points along the horizon level. So anything that occurs in there that's moving or that doesn't look right, it can pick out very quickly and therefore take evasive action. If we're talking about eyes that have really excellent acuity, then we have to turn to the birds, because the birds have eyes that are the most adapted for high quality vision. Birds have incredibly variant ecologies. They dive, they are fruit eaters, they are predators. The ones that always capture human imagination are the raptors. And the reason is because they do in fact have the best vision of any animal, the highest acuity of any animal that we know of. Raptors also have a fovea, but it is deeply indented into the eye, much more deeply than ours is. And so that has much greater surface area than just a cup-shaped fovea has. So as light enters this deep pit, it actually diverges and magnifies the image to a small extent. So it's like having binoculars, a very small patch, but with extremely high acuity. So an animal like a peregrine falcon, the eyes are almost the same size as ours in an animal that's immensely smaller than us. And its acuity is about 5 to 7 times ours. And so when a peregrine is flying 1,000 meters high in the sky, it's still capable of picking up movement on the ground at great distances and to locate prey and to decide which are useful to attack and which ones are not worth attacking. Let's talk about owls for just a minute. Owls have eyes that are sort of tubular shaped. In other words, the eye is not a perfect sphere like our eyes are. And by making it tubular, the animal is essentially disposing of part of the volume of the eye and the head and can make more of that volume available for frontal vision as a result. So the two eyes can be packed relatively close to each other, but they can still have really large magnifications, which means that the image is large on the retina, which means that the owl has good detail vision. Now, interestingly enough, eyes like that of an owl turn up in one other place in the world, and that is in the deep sea. Deep sea fishes often have tubular eyes. A good example is hatchetfish. Hatchetfish have gorgeous tubular eyes. This is adapted for restricting the visual field to just looking overhead of the fish. If you're in the deep sea, the best place to look for something is directly overhead, because that's where the light field is. The light is compressed by the refraction at the water's surface into a circle of light straight up over the fish. And that circle of light can have prey in it or can have predators in it. And so these animals often will build eyes that can just see that little bit of the world looking straight up and look for prey in that part. And hatchetfishes hunt by looking up and then striking from below. The big advantage of vision, and the reason why it comes up again and again in animals, is it gives you fairly quick information, and it gives you extraordinarily good directional information, much better than any other sense does. So that's why it's evolved over and over again in animals. Making an eye is ridiculously easy evolutionarily, it turns out. It's not at all complicated. The simplest thing you can have is just a photoreceptor. It detects light, tells the creature whether the light's present or absent, which is useful because even that can tell an animal something weird is going on. The light suddenly dipped really quickly. I don't think they're thinking this, but evolution is saying this is a good time to get out of here. So the next step is to take that cell and multiply it times 10 or 100 or 1,000 and then lay out an array of these cells that can see a little bit of information about shape and direction of things. It doesn't necessarily see anything, but it can respond to things. If you look at a flatworm like a thing called planaria, and each of those little eyes is a black pigment, which is what you see, and within that pigment there's a group of photoreceptor cells, and those creatures are then sampling a little region of space with each eye, and they can tell them which way to swim or which way to go if the light changes suddenly, or if they want to go towards the light, they can orient their body so they head towards that light. From there, the obvious thing is to add more receptors. The step that every animal has gone through at some point in its ancestry is to add additional receptors until you get a large number, maybe 100, in this eye cup that you've got. There's no optics there to speak of except for the shape of the eye. So what do you do? Well, one solution is to restrict where light comes to that receptor array. And so an animal can build what's called a pinhole eye, basically close down the opening to that cup so it's smaller and smaller, which means that the image formed becomes sharper and sharper. There's only one really good example that can be illustrated today. That's the nautilus, which is a deep-sea creature. You would never expect that would be the one place to find a pinhole eye because deep-sea creatures don't get much light. And pinhole eyes are inherently very insensitive because they have a very small opening, so not much light gets into an eye of that type, and they don't focus it beyond the restriction in aperture. So the image is extremely dim. And why nautilus, which is a pretty big animal with at least moderately complicated behavior, has been happy to sit around with an eye like this is kind of a mystery. But, nautiluses do what they have to do. They don't seem to mind. So nautilus is a real outlier there. I think the main thing is the more that I work with animals and the more that I work with marine creatures is that these creatures have their own lives and that their lives are so utterly different from ours that their experience of the world is truly alien. So there are jellyfish. It's kind of terrifying to think this. There's lethal jellyfish out there, jellyfish that can kill a person, who have eyes that have beautiful, perfect lenses in them. They look like a small version of our eye, a tiny version of our eye, and they work the same way. Now, jellyfish don't have brains. They have a ring of nerves that run around the body that analyze something, and these creatures can make directed responses. They can move towards shadows or move towards light, depending on what's motivating them. Why they have these insanely complicated eyes is not obvious. Their experience of the world is truly alien. I don't think that we could find anything more alien in another galaxy than we find right here on our planet in terms of the way in which it interacts with its world and what it needs to know from its world and what is important to it. Scallops go off in a totally new direction. Scallops have about 60 eyes arranged around the edge of their mantle, the part that we don't eat. These eyes look around all the margins of the shell in all different directions. Each eye sees a patch of the world and sees enough detail to tell the scallop what's going on in its part of the world. The scallops don't even have much of a brain. In fact, it'd be hard to define the brain of a scallop. They have a bunch of ganglia, which are nerve cell groups. We suspect that these ridiculously complicated eyes are probably mostly there just to tell the scallop when it's time to either close its shell or possibly initiate an escape response. Scallops are really interesting because they're a mollusk. Mollusks have the greatest diversity of eyes of any group of animals. They go from extraordinarily simple eyes that can just barely see whether light's on or off, to eyes like the eyes of a giant squid, which is the biggest eye that we know of that's ever evolved. Other mollusks are things like octopuses and squids, and octopuses are interacting with their world all the time. They're looking for things to eat. They're particularly alert for predators, being soft-bodied creatures. They're very vulnerable to predation by anything with teeth or claws, so it's necessary for them to be aware of what's happening around them. Octopuses have good vision. They have large eyes. They have good optics, beautiful optics, so they can see quite clearly. So they probably have a sense of vision that is not so totally different from ours. But of course, what an octopus sees depends on what an octopus needs to see, and I'm not really able to tell you that. We give volition to all kinds of things, but what they're doing is what they do. It's not necessarily what we interpret them doing. Take a shark, for example. Sharks are impressive animals. They're beautiful animals, but it's difficult to imagine a shark as anything other than a machine. I don't think anybody would say that a shark is thinking about things. It's doing things. If you could talk to a shark, it would just say fish, danger, friend, enemy, mate. That's kind of the whole world of a shark's existence. And it doesn't sit there and say, why did God make me a shark? Or why do Chinese people want to eat my fins? That's not its world. We know a lot about their vision. Sharks are vertebrates. They're related to us. Their eyes are related to our eyes. They're extremely good eyes. They're acute. They have a lot of receptors. They have cone cells and rod cells, so they can see color, as well as shades of brightness and darkness. So the quality of the eye in a shark is comparable to our eyes, and possibly even better than our color vision. Fish have beautiful color vision. They have better color vision than humans have. In fact, most fishes have a higher dimensionality of color than we have. In addition to the receptors that are much like ours, blue, green, and red, they have an ultraviolet sensitive photoreceptor set, so they can see in the UV. Many coral reef fishes have a receptor set very much like this. So they're seeing colors that we don't even know about. So, color vision in humans is important and good, but it's nothing extraordinarily special. Now, insects, they actually have more color classes of receptors than we have. They actually see basically 4 primaries, 2 kinds of UV, blue and green. And they put those together somehow and can interpret that as a color signal. They all have compound eyes. Compound eye consists of many, many essentially identical units that sample the world point by point. And the whole image is sometimes called a mosaic image. Each unit sees one point in space. It doesn't see an image at that point. It just sees how much light there is and how much color there is at that point. Their acuity is extremely poor, only maybe 1/100th of our acuity. So they're seeing, when we see a face, they're just seeing a blob with maybe a couple of dark areas where the eyes would be. That's about all they're going to pick out. Their motion vision is fantastically good because they have to fly through spaces and not crash into things, so they have almost unbelievable motion vision. They have a much simpler nervous system, so things are processed really quickly and everything's more compact, which makes everything faster. So their vision is very fast and it's very reflexive, so they're able to see emotion extremely early and make a decision about what it means and where it's coming from, and then evade. Now, insects have an infinite arrangement, just almost uncountable arrangement of ecological roles. They can be down in the grass, they can be flying, they can be living in trees, they can be out hunting. They have many, many different ways of making a living. And there's so many possible choices that each demands an eye that's specialized to be best at that job. In fact, the world's most efficient aerial hunter is not a hawk, it's a dragonfly. Dragonflies can successfully capture prey on up to 90% of their predatory attacks. It's pretty fabulous. What they're doing is they're visually inspecting space above them for small dots that are flying. And if they spot a dot of appropriate speed and appropriate size, their little dragonfly brains say, that's prey, it's an insect, I can catch that. And they'll make a quick flying ascent and snatch that prey out of the air. And the way that they can see this is that the whole top part of the eye is adapted for seeing overhead with extreme detail. So they can see very, very well looking up. They see rather poorly looking in front, and they see very poorly looking down. But looking up, they have excellent vision, especially up and slightly in front of them. So they try to place their prey item in that part of the visual field and chase it down with a very quick flying attack. So that's an insect eye that's really adapted for that job of pursuit and prey capture. But there's other insect eyes for other jobs. And so if we think about something like a honeybee eyes are adapted primarily for finding flowers and for finding their way around. They'll always know where they are because as they fly, they look at the sky and they monitor either the position of the sun or the position of a field of light called the polarized light field that we don't see but that honeybees see very well, and use that information to orient what direction they're traveling. And so doing that, they can tell what direction they're flying, and by monitoring their speed through the air, they can tell how far they've flown, so they know pretty much where they are all the time. Bees have ultraviolet vision, and they use it for identifying flowers and for looking for patterns of flowers that guide them to where the nectar is. And if they encounter a patch of flowers, they can return to the hive. Since they've been keeping track of where they are using the sun and the sky the whole time, they can use that same information to get back home again. And once they get home, they use that very same information to then do this waggle dance that bees are so famous for, and tell other bees in the hive that food can be found at a given distance in a given direction. So they'll tell other bees, if you fly 30 degrees left of the sun and you fly for 200 meters, there'll be flowers there. Go there and get some food. The animal that I started my research on when I was working on visual physiology of marine animals was, strangely enough, an animal that has probably the most remarkable known visual system of all, and that's vision in mantis shrimps. A friend of mine calls them shrimps from Mars. That's pretty much what they are. They have amazing eyes, unique to mantis shrimps. Each eye is actually 3 eyes in one. It has a top half and a bottom half. Those are 2 of the parts. And they're pretty much like the compound eyes of a bumblebee or a dragonfly. But in the middle of this regular split eye, there is a thing called a midband. And it's the midband that contains all of the receptors that are sensitive to the special properties of light. So ultraviolet, color receptors, and even some special polarized light receptors are all found just in the midband. The midband only sees a little strip of space. It's like you looking through a very, very narrow slot. You can only see a little tiny bit of the world through that little narrow slot. So to see more of the world, you have to move that slot around. So mantis shrimps see the world by moving their eyes around a lot. That's how they manage to sample the world with this very narrow midband. Now the rest of the eye sees the whole world, but it doesn't see it in color at all. The midband adds a lot of information. So basically the eye is being moved around on the world to color in the world by these movements. What's special about their eyes besides all this stuff? And that is that they have more kinds of photoreceptors than any other animal that we know of today. They have 8 classes of primary photoreceptors. Remember, we have 3. We have red, green, blue. They have 8 classes in the visible, so they have violet, blue, blue-green, green, green, yellow, yellow, orange. They also have 4 more ultraviolet color classes, so they have a total of 12 color classes. Should give them a great color vision. And it looks like behaviorally it's not necessarily as good as ours. It's really hard to say for sure, but probably all this apparatus is there not to give them fabulous color vision, but to give them a simple way of categorizing colors. So that basically they're making a decision about what color they're looking at, not by analyzing it with complicated machinery in the brain like we do. We don't know anything about color till the signal gets to the back of our head, where it goes through a series of analytical stations, one of which extracts color from the stimulus. Mantis shrimps can do this right at the eye and avoid the brain entirely. So what the brain gets is red, orange, yellow, green, whatever that's in that object they're looking at that moment. So it's a way of making color sense operate very quickly and very simply without a lot of neural machinery. And we think that may be what's happening. They are spectacularly pugnacious, violent animals. They catch prey by having a pair of front arms that are specially modified for very high-speed attacks. They can hit an object with the force of a .22 caliber bullet. They have one of the fastest movements ever recorded in animals. The force is huge. They can break an aquarium wall in a large species. They have to have good eyes to have an effective strike. Otherwise, it's useless to them. They have to know where their prey item is, how far away it is, and importantly as anything, what is it? Is it something like a rock, which is going to break my arm, or is it actually something to eat, which is not? And is it another mantis shrimp? Because that's really important. Another mantis shrimp can fight back and can kill you if you attack it. So it needs to know these things quickly. The other thing that pushes it is, in fact, they are dealing with other mantis shrimps. They have to mate. They need to defend their burrows. They need to get along in the world. And to do that, they have to know who they're dealing with. And so mantis shrimps have evolved a really elaborate set of colored signals in many species. Those colored signals say to another mantis shrimp, I am your species or not. I am angry or not. I'm a female or a male, depending on who's doing it. I'm feeling pretty cheerful right now or not. All those things are signaled by color signals that mantis shrimps use. But mantis shrimps have another pattern that we don't see, and that's their polarized light patterns. So they can reflect polarized light in ways that make it possible to have one part of their body stand off as being different from other parts. And they use that to talk to each other. And in particular, some species use a little blue object, which is on one of their front appendages. As a little part of it reflects blue polarized light. They use that, we believe, in communicating their sexual intentions to each other. So this little blue polarizer looks blue to us, but to another mantis shrimp it looks like it's polarized. And that polarization seems to be important. If you destroy the polarization of that little object on the front leg, male mantis shrimps find it much more difficult to find a mate. They're very interesting animals. They make great pets as long as you want to keep one animal in an aquarium, because anything else is in there, it will kill it. You know, we've all been through our own evolutionary paths. We've all gotten our senses through millions of years of ancestors. And the ancestors of dogs separated from the ancestors of humans or of a cat or a mouse or a horse or whatever your pet is, a parrot, even a better example. Their ancestors are separated from our ancestors by millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions of years. I think that human vision is pretty darn good. The thing about humans is we're not adapted. We're really generalist animals. We don't climb in trees very well like our ancestors. We can't outrun a cheetah. Some animal out there can excel us at anything, including vision. But we don't have to feel bad about that. I think we could, in general, say that human vision is, for what we need, it's probably more than enough. And it's one reason probably we depend on it so much, is that it's so well adapted to do almost any kind of job we need. If I was an animal, I would like to be a lot of different animals for an hour each. I don't think I want to be only one. I'd love to be a hawk and see what it's like to see prey from a mile high in the sky. I'd love to be an octopus and see what it's like to catch prey when I'm down in the water. I'd love to be a mantis shrimp and see what it's like to live in their colorful world, in their light, a world that's full of polarized light and ultraviolet light, and just have a sense of what it is they see out there. But I must say that if I put myself in the mind of a hawk or in the mind of a mantis shrimp or in the mind of an octopus, I would have no idea what was going on, because they don't have minds like mine, and what they're sensing is something that I really can't comprehend. So I'm afraid that it's something, as much as I would like to be able to do it, even in the world of virtual reality, it'll never really happen.